the Nike Rival Fly 4. A bit of an oddity currently within the Nike running lineup, but one that fills a very necessary role. I bet a lot of you clicked on this video because you saw the thumbnail and you're like, what is this shoe? What is he talking about now? What weird Nike did he find now? Okay, depends on what country you're coming from. If you're from the US or in Europe, you think of the Rival Fly series as maybe a budget trainer, budget shoe, if you even think of it at all, because it's not very popular. However, here in Asia, specifically Japan and here in Taiwan, as well as some other Southeast Asian countries, this shoe is actually quite beloved and quite popular and very well used. Let's start with a little background as to what the Rival Fly actually is. Back in 2018, Nike took the Peg 35 and stripped it down. They made it a little bit lower to the ground, a little bit wider, a little bit more lightweight, specifically for the Japanese market, and more specifically for Japanese Ekiden runners to be able to train in, to have a trainer that was more to the preferences of Japanese runners, which typically like more flexible shoes that are a little bit wider, a little bit lower to the ground, even up into 2018. And this was just in the early days of the Vaporfly Next Percent. Now, if you don't know what the Ekiden is a relay race series that happens across Japan in the winter, and it's probably the biggest sporting event in Japan and probably one of the biggest running events in the world. But the legacy of the Rival Fly was that it was always a trainer intended for the Japanese market for Ekiden runners. And the Rival Fly in 2018 was that shoe. There was an update in 2019 for the Rival Fly 2, which was really just an upper update. And then in 2020, we got the Rival Fly 3, which is a bit more of a substantial update. And this is why when you see the colorway packs that Nike releases for the Ekiden shoes, there's usually one shoe in there that no one knows what it is. And for many years, there are a lot of rumors were like, that's a new Vaporfly, or that's a new this or that. No, it's always been the Rival Fly because it's an Ekiden racing shoe. It's the shoe that probably is the one that's most associated with the Ekiden until really recently where the Vaporfly or the Alpha Fly, because that's what's raced in, has become more associated with it. And with Nike stuff here in Taiwan, generally what's popular in Japan is popular here, specifically with Nike and running. So given how popular the Rival Fly is in Japan, the Rival Fly was actually really popular here. And in fact, if you go into any store that sells Nike, any Nike store, no matter what the size, in Japan or Taiwan, you're pretty much guaranteed to see two shoes, some Pegasus of some sort and a Rival Fly. That's how popular it is. But if you're in the States, and maybe Europe, but definitely in the States, and specifically you're a kid who started cross country or track, maybe in junior high, high school, I can pretty much guarantee that your first pair of spikes were a pair of Rival spikes. The Rival spike is really the initial spike that I think a lot of people in the high school level in the US get into. And I think it's similar in Europe when you're just getting into track or cross country. The Rival is definitely something that's recommended or that you'll see. Now, Rival in the US, as far as a product name for Nike, has always meant entry level. Not really budget, not really performance, somewhere in between. Your first pair of spikes is probably a Rival. So as you can see here, even on Nike.com right now, there's a Rival Sprint, a Rival Distance, a Rival XC, and a Rival Waffle, which is a very interesting shoe because that's the closest to the old Waffle Racer that still exists. But back to the Rival Fly. The Rival Fly made its way to Europe, I think, by the Rival Fly 2. I definitely remember seeing it in European advertisements for Nike, and it was really sort of a budget trainer of some sorts. I don't think it was very popular. The Rival 2 was in the US, but it was more of, in my mind, a sneakerhead shoe. There were some colorways of it that got a little popular for sneakerheads, but, you know, it wasn't really ever popular. The Rival Fly 3, which is a shoe that I spent a long time in 2020 when I first got here to Taiwan, late 2020, early 2021, I put about 250 kilometers in a pair of Rival Fly 3s. In fact, I ran in the Rival Fly 3 really until I got a pair of Streak Flies, and that really replaced it. But the Rival Fly 3 actually came out in the States, I think towards the end of 2022, definitely sometime in the spring in 2023. And I think that's probably the first shoe that a lot of Americans probably really ever saw from the Rival Fly series. So what do we actually have here with this shoe? Well, Nike hasn't released really any specs on this shoe other than they have said that it's an 8mm drop. And like all Nike race shoes at the moment, I would say the drop in the shoe feels like a real 8mm. Now, to my measurements, measuring where World Athletics measures shoes, I get about 20 to 22 mil in the forefoot, about 30 in the heel, given that there's an 8mm drop. So I think that makes sense for what this shoe actually is. Comes in at 8.28 ounces or 235 grams. Again, that's not a published spec from really anywhere. That's me weighing my own pair of shoes. And what's interesting about this shoe is it's probably the first pair of shoes that I've weighed where my right and left shoes are identical weight. So that says something about the quality control of this shoe. Now, the midsole foam is Cushionlon 3.0. There's no fancy foam in this, and I'll talk more about the midsole foam in a bit. There is a Zoom air unit in the forefoot, and there is a shank in the midfoot. There's no plate in the shoe. It is a nylon shank that's about here to here. Very similar to what was in the Streak Fly, or if you remember the older Streak series. And I would describe the ride of the shoe is soft. It's Cushionlon 3.0. And where have you heard of Cushionlon? Well, it was in this shoe, the Vomero 17 last year. That was the carrier foam under the Zoom X foam. So what Cushionlon has always been for Nike is just their basic EVA foam, their rubberized EVA foam. And Cushionlon 3.0 is a softer version of Cushionlon foam from many years back. It's an older foam, but it's now Nike's basic EVA foam. And because of that, I would say this is a soft ride, but because of the very present forefoot Zoom air unit and the shank, the nylon shank that's in the middle of this shoe, you do get a very responsive pop off the toe, but it's not a Zoom X pop. This shoe runs very much like a classic Nike racing flat of old, and I'll get into that comparison in a bit. As far as the upper goes on this shoe, well, there's a lot going on this upper, and Nike only describes this shoe as a lightweight breathable mesh. And I think that's probably the best description of this upper because there's nothing fancy here. There's nothing really going on with this upper. It's not one of Nike's premium materials. It feels pretty rough, but it does the job. I actually think the eyelet chain is actually quite good in this. It has a surprisingly padded tongue that Nike also calls a race-inspired tongue, whatever that means. I think it looks like a Vaporfly tongue. But overall, the upper on this shoe is nothing fancy. It's not going to win any type of awards, and it's got all this weird detail over here on the medial side, which doesn't really need to be there, and it has this sort of secondary swoosh on the upper, which also doesn't need to be there. But overall, the lockdown of this upper is actually pretty good. Now, I went true to size in this. Again, US men's size 9, that's what I wear in pretty much every Nike over the past few years. And this shoe fits comfortably. It has a bit of a race fit. I wouldn't call it a true race fit, but it's not a training fit. It's somewhere in between those, but definitely true to size was right for me. And what's important with going true to size in a shoe like this from Nike is that it's going to put the air unit right where it should be under the ball of your foot. And I think that's really important for the performance of this shoe because that's how you're going to load and get any type of performance out of this shoe. So it works well for my foot size. Moving to the midsole of this shoe, as I said, it's Cushionlon 3.0. Now, Cushionlon foam is Nike's just generic rubberized EVA foam. It's been around forever. They've gone through a couple generations. And as I said, Cushionlon 3.0 was first seen in the Vomero 17 last year as the carrier foam under the Zoom X layer. Now, Cushionlon 3.0 is not a fancy foam. I don't think it's a supercritical foam. It's just a very basic EVA foam. And it's soft. That softness, though, makes the Zoom air unit, and there's only a 4-foot Zoom air unit in this shoe, very, very present. Present in a similar way to the older Peg 37 or 38, where it only had that big Zoom air unit and it was very present in the 4-foot. I happen to like that. I don't think a lot of people actually like that. So this shoe, if you get the Zoom air unit in the right spot under the ball of your foot, when you hit a 4-foot strike in the shoe, it feels really nice. You do get that explosive pop of the Zoom air unit. Now, as I said, there is a midfoot shank in the shoe, but it's a very flexible shank. It's not doing a lot. And if we look at the bottom of the shoe, I think the shank's running from about there to about there. It's not a full plate. There's no plate in this shoe. It doesn't go into the forefoot like Adidas shanks. It's really just in the middle of the foot, and it's still fairly flexible. But you do notice it given how soft this foam is, because it does control the twist of the shoe. And that's what a forefoot or a midfoot shank should do in a shoe, unlike what we see in a lot of Adidas shoes. It should control the twist of the shoe. And you definitely do notice that, and it allows you to load the forefoot of the shoe quite well. And moving to the outsole of this shoe, we have actually a lot going on here as well. Now, there is a very similar waffle type piece of black rubber here, mostly on the medial side under the big toe in the forefoot of the shoe. Very similar to what you see from a pattern-wise on the Alpha Fly 3. But we have this weird gray area of foam here under the lateral side where you're compacting the ground. Now, I think this is the same rubber. It's just the pattern. It's cosmetic. There's just, again, a lot going on there. In the back, we have, I think, similar material, similar rubber, and there's a lot more coverage back here. And as you can see, there's the cutout for the shank that's in the middle. Again, it's a shank that runs in the midfoot, not a plate in this shoe. And you can see there's a cutout in the forefoot that's very reminiscent of the cutout in this shoe, the Alpha Fly 3. So from a design language on the outsole, there's a lot of similarities here. And in fact, this is a design language that Nike's carrying through a bunch of other shoes, most recently seen here in the new Zoom Fly 6. You can see a lot of outsole design similarities between the new Zoom Fly 6 and the Rival Fly 4. And from a grip standpoint of this outsole, I think it works really well. Again, I'm a forefoot striker who supinates, so this feels like it's going to last a lot longer than these waffles are. And I do feel a lot of grip on the shoe, and I've run this shoe on a bunch of surfaces, which I'll talk about in the ride section. But I'm getting good wear on this. I get good feel on this. I have a lot of grip in this. This shoe just sort of works. Again, there's nothing fancy. There's no cutting edge, top tier materials in this shoe, but it works. And the last thing I feel I need to mention about this shoe, and this is something I don't frequently mention on this channel, is the price. This shoe is $100 USD. Yes, $100 USD. And while there's no premium materials in this, there's no cutting edge top tier materials in this shoe, you're getting a lot of quality for that price in this shoe. And as I said, I think this shoe can be very useful in a lot of rotations because it's filling a big gap for Nike that Nike hasn't had in some time. And what is that gap? Well, it's this gap. This is the Streak Fly. This is the original Streak Fly. This is Nike's midfoot shanked, non-plated, really race flat. Now, the Streak Fly 2, which we've seen in leaks, there's no official release information about it yet, is a fully plated, carbon plated shoe. We know that, we've seen all those details. But this is now a fairly old shoe, so as Nike's moving the Streak Fly to a carbon-plated shoe, something much more like the Takumi Sen 10 shoe from Adidas, Nike didn't really have a race flat, a non-plated race flat anymore. Again, this shoe's still in the lineup, but it's gonna be going away really soon. And I think that's where the Rival Fly 4 can fill in the gap. This feels like Nike's new race flat. And having the Rival name, at least in the US and Europe, this is sort of Nike's entry-level racing shoe now. And I could see a lot of use cases for high school runners for this shoe, for cross-country, having a race flat that could be track or road and really everything in between. And especially if you're racing cross-country where you can't wear spikes or there's a lot of harder surfaces and you don't want to buy a pair of Vaporflies, well, this is going to be a really good option. So this does fit within the Rival name, but I also think from a lineup standpoint, this is Nike's new plateless racing flat. Now, I've done 3 runs in this shoe, and the first run in this shoe was a mix of easy and a few kilometers of marathon pace and half marathon pace, because I was trying to figure out what is this shoe. Now, I said I had run quite a bit in the Rival Fly 3, but the Rival Fly 3 was definitely not a race shoe, did not feel like a race flat. In fact, I described it a lot as a Peg 36.5. It felt like the Peg 36. It even was Cushlon foam from the 36. And it felt like a trainer. This shoe, as soon as I put it on and I picked up the pace over easy pace, it kind of came alive. And I realized that this is a much more race-oriented shoe. So in that first run, I went through the gears of some marathon pace, some half marathon pace, and this shoe did surprisingly well. The next 2 runs that I did in this shoe were workouts. They were 200 and 400 workouts in this shoe. And one was on the road, one was on the track. And on the track, this shoe really came alive. It was a really snappy shoe, especially in the turns, because there's a lot of stability in the shoe. It's a narrow platform, but it is fairly stable. So this is an excellent workout shoe if you want to do those workouts in a non-plated shoe, because right now, besides the Streak Fly, Nike doesn't really offer an option for that. When the Streak Fly 2 is out, this is going to be your non-plated racing flat workout option, and it does an excellent job of it. Another thing that I think cements the Rival Fly 4 as Nike's new non-plated racing flat is the design language. If you look at the design language and the silhouette of the Rival Fly 4 compared to the new Zoom Fly 6, you see a lot of overlap, a lot of similarities, especially in the silhouette and the outsole. And those design tweaks are coming from this shoe, the Alpha Fly 3. So if you look at the Rival Fly 4 and the Alpha Fly 3 side by side, again, you see a lot of similarities. In fact, if you look at my own shot of my own Rival Fly 4, you can see it even more clearly. You see the forefoot zone of the shoe. You see the heel zone of the shoe. You see the swooped back heel rocker in the shoe. You see a lot of similarities to the Alpha Fly 3. In fact, what really I find interesting is if you watch my Future of the Alpha Fly video and the little Frankenfly mock-up that I did in there, the silhouette of the Rival Fly 4 is very similar to the Frankenfly mock-up that I made. Now, when I did that mock-up, I hadn't seen the Rival Fly 4. I didn't know that's what this shoe was actually going to be, but look at these 2 shoes. They're very similar. If you don't know what I'm talking about with this Frankenfly, I'll put a link in the description to the video, but there's a silhouette reference here, and it's surprisingly similar. Now, I do see Nike putting a lot of emphasis on this shoe as being their more traditional racing flat because it now is available globally. But what would be really interesting with this shoe for me is if Nike took the Atom Knit upper, put it on this shoe, left the midsole geometry the same, kept the forefoot Zoom Air unit, kept the midsole shank, but put this in Phylon foam and therefore probably dropped the weight of the shoe well under 7 ounces, probably closer to 6 ounces. This would be probably one of the best racing flats the brand has ever made, taking some of this technology, putting in this shoe. We don't need the super foam, but we need the lighter weight upper on this shoe. But as this shoe stands now, it's a very nice racing flat. It's very fun to run in, and it is a reference to the older feel of Nike Streaks. And I, for one, really miss that. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. If you find this content useful, consider subscribing. You'll see more content from me pop up in your feed. If not, drop a like on this video because it helps this channel continue to grow, which I always appreciate. And with that, I'll catch you in the next one.